right, folks, let's dive right into this one, because you're not going to believe where this story goes. But before we start, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or town in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach. All right, y'all. I have no idea how to even start this because it still feels like some bizarre fever dream. But here we go. So I, 22F, am from a small town in Ohio. One of those places where everyone knows everyone and gossip spreads faster than wildfire. My family? Pretty average, I guess. Middle class, nothing extravagant. My parents have always been the we did the best we could type, which, yeah, I get. But sometimes it felt like they were just coasting through life. Growing up, they hammered it into my head that education was everything. Go to college, get a good job, and don't end up struggling like us, they'd say. They made it sound like this noble crusade, like they were prepping me for some heroic mission to break the cycle of just scraping by. And honestly, I bought into it. I worked my ass off in high school, straight A's, extracurriculars, volunteering. I was that kid. When I got accepted into a university in Columbus, it felt like I'd finally made it. First-generation college student, the pride of the family. Except, pride doesn't pay tuition. Here's the thing, my parents were all about talking about how important college was, but when it came to actually helping me, crickets. I'm not saying I expected them to bankroll my education or anything. I knew from the jump that I'd need loans and part-time jobs to make it work. But I did expect them to, I don't know, co-sign the damn loans like they promised. When it came time to fill out the financial aid paperwork, I asked my parents for their tax info. You'd think I'd ask them to sell a kidney. My mom was like, oh, we'll get to it later. And my dad was all, you don't need to rush. Deadlines aren't real. Spoiler, they are. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, panicking, because the FAFSA isn't optional if you're broke like me. Every time I brought it up, they'd brush me off. We'll get to it, sweetie. Don't worry. But I was worried. I was trying to start my first semester, and without that paperwork, I couldn't get approved for the loans I needed. I ended up working 2 part-time jobs just to scrape by. Between classes, I was serving at a diner and doing late-night shifts at a gas station. It still wasn't enough. I was drowning in stress, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. I figured, okay, they're dragging their feet now, but they'll come through eventually. They didn't. By the time my second semester rolled around, I was in trouble. My tuition bill was overdue, and the school was threatening to put a hold on my account, which meant I wouldn't be able to register for next semester's classes. I had a meeting with the financial aid office to try to figure out a solution. I thought maybe they could work something out, an extension, a payment plan, something. That's when the real nightmare started. I walked into the office, fully prepared to beg if I had to. The financial aid counselor, this sweet older lady named Mrs. Andrews, pulled up my file and frowned. Not the let me help you kind of frown. No, this was the something's very wrong here kind of frown. My stomach immediately dropped. Are you sure your account is active? She asked, tilting the monitor so I could see. It says here that your financial aid was voided. Void? What the hell did that even mean? I told her there had to be some kind of mistake. She nodded, saying, let me check something, and started typing furiously. After a few minutes, she sighed and turned the screen back to me. I'm so sorry, but according to our records, you're deceased. I laughed. Like, I actually laughed out loud because, what? How does something like that even happen? I said, clearly I'm not. I'm sitting right here. Mrs. Andrews gave me this pitying look, like she wanted to believe me but couldn't ignore what was on her screen. She said, I know, dear, but this paperwork says otherwise. And that's when she pulled out the letter. It was a formal notice sent to the school declaring my death, signed by none other than my parents. My actual, living, breathing parents. I stared at the letter, my brain short-circuiting. This has to be a mistake, I said. Why would my parents do this? Mrs. Andrews just shook her head and said, I wish I had an answer for you, but you'll need to talk to them. This is very unusual. Unusual? Try batshit insane. I left the office in a daze, clutching the letter like it was a bad dream I could wake up from if I just held it tight enough. As soon as I got outside, I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, all cheery like nothing was wrong. Hi, sweetie. How's school? I didn't even bother with pleasantries. Mom, why does the school think I'm dead? Dead silence, no pun intended. What do you mean? She finally said, her voice suddenly way too high-pitched. I mean, I snapped, that I just left the financial aid office and they showed me a letter, Mom, signed by you and Dad, saying I'm deceased. What the hell is going on? She stammered for a second before blurting out, oh, it's complicated. Complicated. I was ready to lose my mind. What's complicated about pretending your daughter is dead? At this point, I heard my dad in the background saying, just tell her. Tell me what? My mom sighed like she was the victim in all this and said, we couldn't afford to co-sign your loans, sweetie. If we did, it would have ruined our credit. This was the only way to get out of it. Y'all. I thought I was going to pass out. My parents, faked my death to avoid paying for my college tuition. They didn't even have the decency to tell me. They just let me keep working myself to the bone, thinking they'd eventually help, while they were out here submitting fake death notices like it was some casual life hack. I was so angry, I couldn't even speak. I just hung up the phone and sat on a bench outside the office, trying not to cry in public. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. These were the people who'd spent my entire life preaching about the importance of education, about bettering myself. And now, because they didn't want to deal with a little financial inconvenience, they'd basically written me off. Literally. I had no idea what to do next. How do you even fix something like that? Where do you start? The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't rely on them anymore. I was on my own. And honestly, that realization hurt more than anything. All right, let me tell you, after that conversation with my mom, I sat on that bench for what felt like hours, just staring at the letter. I kept rereading the words, hoping I'd missed something, like maybe it was a typo or a misunderstanding. Nope. There it was, in black and white. A formal declaration that I, their daughter, was no longer among the living. Signed, sealed, and delivered to my university by them, my own parents. Once the initial shock wore off, the anger set in. I mean, how do you even wrap your head around something like this? These are the people who are supposed to support you, who raised you to believe they'd always have your back. And instead, they pulled the most insane stunt I could imagine. Faking my death to avoid co-signing a loan. Who does that? I knew I had to go back to their house. I couldn't let this slide with just a phone call. I needed answers, and I needed them face to face. So I drove the 2 hours back to our little town, gripping the steering wheel the whole way like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. My head was spinning with questions. Did they even feel bad about this? Did they think I wouldn't find out? What was their plan if the school tried to reach me? None of it made any sense. When I pulled into their driveway, I just sat in the car for a minute, trying to collect myself. The house looked the same as it always had, modest, a little rundown, but still homey. It felt surreal, knowing that the people inside had done something so cruel and ridiculous. I finally got out, marched up to the door, and rang the bell. My mom opened it, smiling like everything was fine. Oh, sweetie, you didn't have to come all this way. We could have talked over the phone. Talked over the phone? Like this was a casual disagreement about what's for dinner? I pushed past her into the living room, holding up the letter like it was Exhibit A in a court trial. What the hell is this? I said, my voice shaking. What were you thinking? My dad was sitting in his recliner, flipping through a fishing magazine like it was just another Tuesday. He looked up, sighed, and said, Look, we didn't have a choice. You don't understand how hard things have been for us financially. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A choice? You think this was your only option? You could have just said no to co-signing the loans. You didn't have to pretend I was dead. My mom started wringing her hands like she was the victim in all this. Sweetie, you don't understand. If we co-signed, it would have ruined our credit. We'd never be able to refinance the house or get a car loan. We had to protect ourselves. Protect themselves. That was all they cared about. Not me, not my future, not the fact that I'd been breaking my back working 2 jobs while trying to keep up with classes. It was all about them. I said, so your solution was to screw me over? Do you have any idea what I've been going through? Do you even care? My dad had the nerve to roll his eyes. Don't be so dramatic. It's not like you're actually dead. You're alive, you're healthy, and you're smart. You'll figure it out. You always do. That was it. That was the moment I realized I couldn't rely on them anymore. They didn't see me as their daughter. I was just a problem they wanted to get rid of. I was shaking with rage, but I refused to cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I said, "You're right about one thing. I'll figure it out. But don't expect me to come to you for help ever again." My mom started crying, of course. "You don't mean that. We love you. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I laughed bitterly. "This wasn't best for me. You didn't think about me at all. You just thought about yourselves." I turned around and walked out before I could say something I'd regret. As I got into my car, I heard my mom calling after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove away, my chest tight with anger and heartbreak. That night, I sat in my tiny dorm room, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. My financial aid was a mess because of their stupid stunt, and I didn't have anyone else to turn to. I spent hours on the phone with the university trying to explain the situation. I had to prove I wasn't dead, which, let me tell you, is a lot harder than it sounds. They needed a new birth certificate, letters from my doctors, and even a sworn affidavit from a notary. All because my parents decided my life was a convenient excuse to save their credit score. It took weeks, but I finally got things sorted out with the school. My financial aid was reinstated, and I was able to register for classes again, but not without a mountain of new stress. My parents, they haven't reached out since that day. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd pick up if they did. I've been trying to move on, but it's hard. Every time I think about what they did, I feel this mix of anger and sadness that's hard to shake. How do you forgive something like that? How do you trust people who faked your death just to avoid a little financial inconvenience? I don't know if I'll ever have answers to those questions. TLDR, my parents faked my death to avoid co-signing my student loans, leaving me to clean up the mess while they acted like it was no big deal. I've cut ties with them, but the betrayal still stings.